Today on the Videomaker podcast, Chris and I talked to filmmaker and blogger and host of the Show Don't Tell podcast, Noam Kroll. We talked quite a bit about how the pandemic is impacting the motion picture industry. And also we get into micro-budget filmmaking and, there's just the general idea of being a specialist in filmmaking and video production versus being a generalist. Really interesting conversation. Hope you get a lot out of it. As always, if you like this podcast, we'd love it if you went over to iTunes or Spotify and hit the subscribe button. It's really, really helpful for podcasts like us, and also hopefully really convenient for you. It'll deliver the podcast right to your mobile device every Monday morning at 5 a.m. Pacific, the time that no one wants to be up downloading podcasts. So with that out of the way, let's get on with the show. Welcome to the Videomaker podcast. With me today is Chris Monlux across the table.
Hello.
And today our special guest, filmmaker, podcaster, blogger, you name it, Noam Kroll. Noam, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me on.
So Noam, where are you calling us from today?
I'm calling you from home here in Los Angeles and just enjoying a kind of smoke-free day. It's been super smoky here the last couple of days. But where's your studio? I don't know, actually.
We're up in Northern California, about in Chico, about 100 miles north of Sacramento. So yeah, we've been getting the smoke pretty bad too. Actually, today doesn't seem too bad, but apparently it's quite unhealthy. It's tricky. So that's how it goes here in California now.
Yeah,
for sure.
Fires or pandemic, it's take your pick.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, it's a crazy year.
So I guess speaking of fires and pandemic, so you're down in LA, you're a filmmaker. And so how's the pandemic treating you?
Well, it's funny because I guess unlike some filmmakers, I hadn't really been doing a lot of freelance work prior to the pandemic. I do have a production company that was affected in terms of just our usual commercial sort of workflow and some productions we had in the pipeline. But because I tend to do a lot of stuff online, in a sense, I feel grateful that I haven't been probably nearly as affected as a lot of people who are, more day in, day out sort of on set or producing in-person productions. So I released a film during the pandemic. That was probably the biggest, hurdle to overcome because I had weighed the option of maybe I would just hold on to that film and wait for festivals to come back. But, again, considering all things considered and what other people are sort of juggling, I feel, grateful to be, in a pretty good position in terms of my ability to still function almost as I had before for the most part.
So I'd imagine that, the pandemic could help or hurt you, right? So one, you say, the festivals aren't happening, so you lose a little bit of visibility there, I guess. At the same time, everyone's stuck inside for the most part, and online distribution is bigger than ever. So how has it been working out so far? Is it normal? Or, I guess nothing's normal these days, but...
Yeah, nothing's normal. I think from my perspective, and I can speak to other filmmakers who have been releasing films during this time, but it feels pretty normal. Although I have self-distributed other films and one other feature in particular in this sort of budget range and in a similar manner. And I'm finding that this one is getting a lot more traction. I don't know if that's because of any number of other variables or the genre or the way that we're releasing it. There's a lot that goes into it, but there are really no signs that I see right now that this is a bad time to be releasing content. I think people that have it, obviously people are hungry to watch it, and the audiences are out there. So yeah, I'd say my experience has been sort of exceeded my own expectations just in terms of the visibility of the film. But I think across the board, that's what I'm kind of seeing with other friends and colleagues as well.
I've noticed, I was actually just noticing it at lunch today, went on my DVR to see, I'll put something on. And it's like, it hasn't recorded anything new in a long time. There's not a lot of new television coming out. They ran their course, and maybe we'll get a couple episodes of The Walking Dead here at the end of October. But It's interesting. Just all of a sudden, the normal ways you might get content now, you're looking at other places. So I'm totally going to Netflix, going to YouTube, going to Hulu and Amazon like way more often to just see what's there than like the idea before of like, I'm going to sit down and watch a movie, or I'm going to watch, a whole season of something or whatever. I get myself caught in those now when I normally would have just been watching any old thing. So it's interesting how the habits are changing, just I guess due to us being home or whatever. But I've never watched so many films in a year, including going to college, which is pretty awesome to get to do, I guess.
Yeah, I agree. It's been interesting. Unlike you, I've probably watched less films, but maybe more content. I've been consuming a lot of TV and stuff that I normally wouldn't watch, but I'm just sort of giving things a chance because there's not that much new stuff coming out, or there are films like Tenet that I really want to see, but obviously, you have limited options to see it. And a lot of us are probably waiting for those films to be available on VOD. So yeah, it's kind of a crazy time, but it's going to be interesting, I think, also next year with regards to film festivals and distributors and anyone that is going to exhibit films, because you wonder how much of a lack of content there will be to sort of fill up those pipelines as well. Or maybe people are just sitting on things now and they're waiting to release it next year. So I guess we'll see, but it's going to be an interesting couple of years for sure.
Yeah, there's totally the hold it back mentality, which I think most of those people that are making that choice are just going to be forced to release it eventually. We're probably not going to get to a point where we're doing normal things even next year to at least 100% normal again. So it's like you're just going to be forced to push it out at some point. It's I think better just to be able to do it now, I guess.
I agree. I think especially because, I mean, for a lot of creative people, I can't speak for everyone, but, for myself, I can say that if I don't finish a project, it's really hard to kind of start the next thing. So I think that a lot of people will wrestle with that, where they'll have this project that's basically done, but they'll kind of feel like they're in purgatory until they can get it out there and see what people think of it and just sort of wash their hands of it. For me, at least, it's a lot harder to kind of think of what's the next idea, what's the next project or business initiative or whatever you're going to work on when you have that sort of, elephant in the room all the time. But, I guess, again, everyone's sort of navigating it differently. So I'm sure a year from now, we'll look back and hindsight will be 2020.
Yeah, I always feel like when finishing a project, you're birthing it, and like no one wants to stay pregnant longer. It makes some sense that that it gets uncomfortable to not share it. But I think the wash your hands of it is totally like I kind of want to move on, and I don't want to concern myself with that, especially artistically. You want to. I'm going on to the next thing. I kind of want to just give that to the world and let it be what it is. And so much before you get to share, you can change and I got a new idea. I can, do I go back to the well, or do I let the thing just lie and wait? That seems difficult as an artist.
I feel like
definitely. Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say something that I feel like is missing from the film and television world right now, and actually to a lesser degree, but still a little something, it is music. But just like stories about the pandemic, like I feel like I could use a little bit of catharsis to, I guess empathize with what other people are going through, or maybe have some sort of, I guess there's a therapeutic sense of it where, you can see other people who are kind of going through the same thing you are. But because, productions are shut down everywhere, we're watching stories that were shot last year, right? And it's possible that we're going to get some pandemic films and TV shows after the pandemic's over, after the catharsis is not needed as much, right? But there's this delayed, this delay that happens where maybe during the pandemic, productions are scaled way back and they're telling really minimal stories about, people going through this. But then they won't be released until as we're, climbing out of it.
Yeah, I think the music.
It's funny. Two things I was going to mention. You may have seen this, but there's a show, I think it's on Hulu, that I just saw an ad for. I haven't seen the show, but I think it's called Love in the Time of Corona or something like that. Have you guys heard of this show?
No.
And it's some sort of series. I think it's either like a mini series or it's episodic, and it follows I guess a bunch of different people in a city, maybe it's New York or whatever, dealing with trying to navigate relationships during the pandemic. I think it's the first thing I've seen that actually dealt with it, and seems like it's a fully produced project and not just something done through Zoom or some other gimmick. But I'm with you, and I had that sort of question too, as far as what are people working on, and will there be those pandemic stories? On Twitter, I actually ran this poll recently, and I asked writers, just out of curiosity, if you're working on a new project right now, how many of you are working on something that's like related to the pandemic, or even if it's sort of like post-apocalyptic or something that feels like timely. And I think it was roughly 85% said that they were not. And I thought it was going to be the opposite. I thought everybody was going to say they were, working on that. But 85% said that they were trying to kind of work more in like escapist genres or, just other things that would take them out of it. So, I would love to see some of it too, because I'm so curious just to see how people, different artists sort of like are influenced by what's going on and funnel that into their work.
I've been noticing a different reaction as a viewer to content that was made at a different time when we could be near people. It's like that commercial, they just hugged.
Yeah.
Where are they at? Where are they allowed to do that? Or like it was a Safe Light commercial I saw that all of a sudden one shot was a guy taking off his mask, and then the rest of it was obviously shot at a different time, but it was like just acknowledging that it's going on and that they're doing that. And of course, the voiceover at the time said, safe, no contact or whatever. But it's just interesting what people are doing to stories to make them work now. I saw another ad that was a bunch of athletes, and it was obvious that their bodies were CG and their faces were their faces, and you could tell were shot on different cameras. Like they probably shot them on their phone, and then someone composited their face on there so they could be together and say something. But it's not, but the thing in it was like, we're contractually obligated to be telling you this, and it sounds like they actually might have been being like, no, you got to do this. Okay, we're gonna call it out then.
Wow,
it's
unbelievable. And now some productions, at least I'm just seeing, even driving down the street here, are picking up. It's been months since. Everyone knows, if you visited LA, you drive around, you always see like the big white, 2-ton or 3-ton trucks that are just parked on the sides of the streets. And so weird not seeing that for so long. And now I'm starting to see some more. But I did, it does sort of bring back like the creative thought again, because even if you're able to practically shoot, like let's say you're telling a story that takes place in modern times, but it doesn't deal with coronavirus. It's just, a love story or something between two people. Depending on when you release that, it might almost feel weird not to address the corona, like, whether it's just showing somebody walking around with a mask in the background or something, because that's what life looks like right now. So, I have to wonder, even for more like contemporary set films, how many of them are kind of sneaking in the masks and the COVID stuff just to make them feel like they're more accurate. And it's a weird parallel to draw, but I think about when iPhones first came out and people were really afraid of like dating the film, so they wouldn't want to show the iPhone. And eventually everyone just kind of showed it because we realized that that's here to stay. So right now, I guess we don't know how long the masks and everything are here. Is it, a few months, a year, 5 years? We don't know. So it's going to be interesting to see, I guess, just how those visuals are weaved into various narratives going forward.
Yeah, I think it might even just be smart for people to accept it, and then now you have a little more safety on your set. Like just everybody's wearing a mask in your show just because we had to. But we might as well just accept it, and it's part of the show, and then just move on. Not every story can accept that, I guess.
There's a chance that society will want to forget this. Like there's an article in the New York Times that came out shortly after the pandemic really started to get going that was talking about the 1918 flu. and how, that was not exactly common knowledge. A lot of people didn't know that happened. And yet more people were killed in America by the 1918 flu than in World War I. And it's because it made society feel so bad about themselves, right? Like having to, see each other as not quite the enemy, but at least, they're fearful of one another. That society kind of pushed it out of their collective memory. That generation did. And so it's possible that we may go through the same thing when this is all done and people just prefer not to really address it.
It'd be pretty hard with the amount of images that are taken these days to get around it. I'm thinking 1919, or 1917, 18. It was one of those years. There wasn't a whole lot of mass media at that point.
That's true. I wonder if it'll become almost genre dependent, because maybe if you're doing like a drama or something that's a bit grittier and more, down and dirty, you sort of might want to make it feel that much more realistic, even if it's a bit uncomfortable. Mm-hmm. But then at the same time, we'll see more of the opposite, the sort of comic book films and those films that are obviously never going to have to show that. Or just in general, I think back to other moments in history, whether it was, post like pandemic or World War I, World War II, and you look at the kind of movies made around that time, and, there's just speaking to like the latter, there's, musicals being made and all of these things. So people are like forgetting all of the chaos that's going on. So I think you bring up a great point, which is when, people go to the movies and entertainment to escape to some degree reality, or to get some sort of new perspective on reality. So you have to kind of wonder how that's going to all play out, I guess, but it's going to be interesting.
I have a tie-in here. Back to your cell phone. I was actually watching House. My wife started watching House over again, and the show, and they someone had a flip phone, and it was like, oh, that's early 2000s. I know exactly when that was made, and I'm like, now it'll be masks. Oh yeah, that was 2020. They're wearing masks. We know that was produced. Whereas I always think of art in general. If you didn't exist and partake in it when it was new, it was all released at the same time. I think of all my favorite Led Zeppelin songs, to me, were all released on the day I discovered them, not, 10, 20 years prior to them. So it's, I think it's interesting how art gets ingested that way. So I guess it will be a genre. It probably might be a genre, right? We'll have pandemic genres after this.
Yeah.
Could be. Just like
for sure.
Genre. Yeah, that's true.
I mean, all of our best World War II films came out long after World War II concluded.
Oh, totally.
Yeah, it's exactly. It's almost, I bet there will be sort of this initial surge of content, because there will be this pent up demand for people that want to see pandemic related stuff, because they need to, people are having a hard time sort of processing it and framing it. And whether it's a documentary or a fictional narrative, that could help, I think, just even psychologically, people to sort of get through difficult circumstances and, build empathy for other people, et cetera. But yeah, maybe there will be a lull, and then 5 or 10 years from now, when we could kind of look back and almost like how a joke has to sort of take a certain amount of time to be funny after like a tragic situation. Maybe we'll find that with films, like there has to be a bit of a grace period, and then we can sort of explore it again once everybody's like collectively ready for that.
I like the idea of pent up demand all of a sudden coming to fruition. So like all those wedding videographers that are out there that like everybody's been putting off for doing their like low key weddings, and then there's going to be a wedding on every single day, like for a whole year for a wedding, videographer to get work. That everybody will be fighting for Wednesday to have a wedding, just so they have a day that they can have, an event with. I mean, I hope that all of a sudden these happy celebratory, music shows and all the rest come after it. But it would be hard to believe that a bunch of films would come out, being that we're all still having a hard time actually producing them, that it might be a little time after everything gets back. But then all the ideas that have been for escapism or whatever that people are writing right now, there's amazing stories being told right now. They're just not being told to anyone. They're being written, at least, being created.
Exactly. I can only imagine how many films, whether they're just ready to be released or they were shot and they're they still have to do pickup shots, or all these sort of movies that are in this middle ground right now, and they're not done. And we're hopefully, or they are done, and we're just not able to see them. But yeah, we're definitely at some point in for a nice surge of content again. I don't know when that'll happen. And it's hard to know if it really will happen as just one point in time when all of a sudden everything comes back, or if it'll just happen so gradually that we almost don't notice and things just sort of slowly get back to that point. But in any case, it'll be nice to start seeing some of these films. And on the flip side, I'm interested to kind of determine and see whether or not studios will continue to do day and date releases, even with bigger films, or let's say a film like Tenet, if they end up releasing it earlier on VOD or something like that, because their numbers aren't doing so well. It'll be interesting, even post-pandemic, how the distribution landscape is affected, I guess, long term. And maybe it won't be. Maybe everything will just go back to how it was. But I have a feeling some of the changes that we're seeing now are probably going to be a little bit more cemented as the months go on.
Yeah, I think there's it's like you don't know you were willing to accept the change until it was forced upon you, and then you realize, oh, that wasn't too bad. You know?
Well, yeah. I mean,
like,
we say that, but who knows if the studios say that, right? Like the studios probably miss their $100 million weekends.
totally. Well,
That's true.
Good luck getting people to movie theaters immediately. You know, I mean, that's the thing is like, if investing in VOD right now for those distribution houses and everything, you know, that's going to be necessary for a while. So if they're not buying it now, they might not exist on the other side of it at all. You got to diversify and figure out some other way to do it. Otherwise, you're not going to get to keep on doing it. And I mean, I think that's probably a warning for every industry. Of if you can't get back to doing it, you better replace it with something else, because it's going to be a while. And I think that's true for the world, not just how we are in the U.S. right now. Is that it's going to be a slow back to normal, and then back to normal will just be. I think back to normal is I can shake my friend's hand. I can be excited to see someone and give them a hug, those kinds of things. Whereas all the societal things, they always change anyway. You know, we just usually aren't on hold waiting for them to change.
That's a great point. Yeah, I agree. I think I don't know. I think about that all the time. And even what you said, just in terms of like other industries, because I'm always just so wrapped up in what's going on in the film industry, but I just think how disrupted everybody is right now. It's kind of mind blowing. But at the same time, there are, people are finding new opportunities as well amid all of this. And there are, I guess, some silver linings if you try to look for them. So hopefully films become more accessible. Hopefully some of the the studios are maybe going to be willing to take chances on smaller films and not put all their eggs in the big tentpole movies that sort of have to have a theatrical release, because even if we defeat this, there could be another issue or another, nobody ever knows what may affect theatrical sort of engagement with audiences. So I think just to diversify the efforts on the studio's part, like they really used to have, studios, if you think back to like sort of the golden era of independent film in the 90s, what I would consider like most recent golden era, there were the big, huge blockbusters still coming out, but then Pulp Fiction and movies like that would be in theaters. And we sort of lost that type of diversity in terms of budget levels in the studio system. And maybe this will be a bit of a wake up call to start diversifying their efforts and put more money into these smaller films. So if they do have to pivot, or if they do have to release on VOD more aggressively, then that's an option.
Yeah, it's this is a time for things could be really bad, and for a lot of people they are. But it's also a time for others to take opportunity. The opportunity might be. I mean, look at Netflix. I think they gained 26 million subscribers this year, which is, like a 25% increase. So some industries and some areas are going to benefit for it all happening. And so because of that, they're going to make a new order of such. And that new, I think in all industries, we've seen that in time. HP is no longer the HP they used to be. Yahoo, not a brand that used to the way it used to be, and how strong, or AOL, those brands that just kind of go by the wayside. There's a lot of other reasons that businesses go in and out of business that aren't pandemic that would have happened anyway.
Exactly. Like a lot of people have said, I think it's sort of accelerating a lot of these changes, not always just necessarily imposing them, but things that may have happened anyway, where we're starting to happen, are sort of just happening now at a more rapid pace.
Yeah, I noticed during the recession, I was making TV commercials at the time, that the businesses that I had observed as being kind of haphazardly run, they went out of business really quick. The ones that were just able to make it because times were good, they were some of the first just to quickly disappear. And you saw a lot of brands doing that. How can I do something that is going to work if this isn't, and I think that creativity it takes to do that. And it's also such a challenge, I think, to one's heart to have to make a change when something was working so well. But it's not like we can stop this train. It's a run.
No, but you're right. I mean, just on the business level, I agree, because pre-pandemic, as you know, of course, we were coming off of basically this 8-10 year run, whatever it was, of this incredible economic growth and all these businesses. And it was almost hard. I want to say it wasn't hard to succeed, but it was a lot easier to succeed probably in the last 10 years than it had ever been if you wanted to start a new business. There were so many avenues open, and there still are. But I think there were companies that perhaps could only exist when the environment that we were in was so strong, and that weren't really diversified in terms of their revenue and their cash flow and their operations and all these different things. And that may have worked in a different economic environment. But then when we're brought into this time, again, whether we're talking about the studio system or any other sort of more legacy oriented business, it's very hard for them to just pivot all of a sudden when the world sort of stopped on a dime. Again, I think, same thing for filmmakers and people sort of freelancing, even not coming from the top level. I think everybody's just finding it a challenge. But again, I think we're all also finding new ways to work. I'm sure you guys have probably had to reconfigure everything, I'm sure, from the podcast to other operations. And I don't know, I mean, has any of it been for the better, or have there been some changes that you've almost enjoyed, I guess, as a result of having to pivot?
I think for the most part, things have changed for the worse. Just in the sense of it sucks to not be able to conduct, business face to face with anyone. It's no fun running a business when you can't travel to visit your business partners in person. Mm-hmm. At the same time, there is some upside, I think. Just people's proclivity to engage face-to-face on Zoom and the like has helped at least us as a media business to conduct business with people. So just as an example, if our sales team is trying to get a hold of a decision maker, they have seemed, at least to me, it seems like they have better luck, closing a deal when they're looking at someone's face and someone is looking at their face versus, on a speakerphone or something. Like all business before this was done with conference call lines and stuff. And now people are happily turning on their webcam and communicating that way. But, outside of that, we're talking about, our office is open, by the way. We have about 14 people here, but at the same time, we got to be above board with all of our business practices. There's all safety and all that kind of stuff, which means people got to stay apart from one another, wear masks all the time. And gatherings of people are just not a thing. And it's been really, really, really challenging, I think.
Yeah. It's a growth hurts. It always hurts, and good growth, bad growth, don't matter. So I think that's, the thing is it's painful to have to do these things. Luckily, we don't have to choose. It's chosen for us. So at least, we can't have a pity party on your own. You get to have it with the rest of the world, which is at least, I think that is hopefully going to bring us together. And I think over time, shared trauma is a good thing for community.
Yeah, that's true.
And so I think that, we're up in Chico, which we're 15, 20 miles from Paradise, which is where the campfire, my shirt actually, where Paradise burnt down. And it was, the amount of community that came together over that trauma, and how like everybody that's here and dealing with this now, like it's almost like I can give you a wink and you're like, oh, I get it. And so I think we'll come out on the other side, hopefully with, stretched legs and able to really, it's like we were the marathon runner that had weights on our legs, and now we took the weights off and now we can really go. I hope we can stay positive in that way, and that this is just growing our muscles we didn't know we needed to grow.
I had that exact thought. I'd say a few times probably over the last few months that I was thinking about before the pandemic how I actually made a short film sort of dealing with this, and we filmed it the day on March 11th, the day that everything sort of like shut down. We were filming it. Anyway, it was sort of just dealing with like social media and how everybody's so disconnected, and we're all sort of addicted to these devices, and we're in person with each other, but we're kind of not really there. And that's how I was feeling before the pandemic, just because, and I use my phone as much as anyone else. So it's not a judgment on anybody, but just when you walk around, it just feels different when, people aren't looking up, and they're not like, you walk by someone on the sidewalk and everyone's face is down. And I had this, thought that, I don't know, maybe it's just optimistic, but maybe when this comes back, we will have this new appreciation, like you said, having gone through this sort of like shared trauma, this new appreciation for just being in real life with other people. Maybe that will create some sort of different engagement. I'm sure people will still be addicted to their TikTok, but maybe we can, bring it down 15 or 20%, and there will be some sort of upswing when everything eventually kind of goes back to normal, whatever that's going to look like.
Yeah, if grandma makes it through, she's going to get lots of visits on the other side.
Yeah, for sure. That's very true.
Like I think about that. You might see people just on a walk or that kind of thing, and it's like, oh man, this is like the only time I come in contact with someone that's, or come near someone that's probably 65 or older. They're not going. Hopefully, they're not being forced to have to go to public places and whatnot. And it's just interesting because it's like I'm seeing a lot more young people. And it's not because there's more young people. It's just they're allowed out more, or maybe they're just willing to be out more.
Yeah. You're absolutely right.
Okay, so let's see. I want to dive into, change gears, talk about kind of the craft of filmmaking. But maybe this is a good time to pause, take a quick break, and come right back. Videomaker has been the go-to website for video production professionals and enthusiasts since 1986. There's a reason a quarter of our audience has been following us for more than 10 years. Simply put, our content makes our audience better at producing video. For whatever level you're at, we have the content to get the quality of work where you want it to be. Nobody knows this better than our Videomaker Plus members. With exclusive offers and access to courses, webinars, back issues, and the digital magazine, they're able to stay up on the top of their production game. So now we want our podcast listeners to get in on the exclusive access. For a limited time only, we're offering a $100 discount to our Professional Plus annual membership. That's 42% off the normal price. To claim this exclusive deal, go to videomaker.com/2020plus. That's videomaker.com/2020plus. PLUS, not the symbol. It only takes a minute to sign up, and you'll get immediate, unrestricted access to all of our content. Don't wait. This offer will not be around for long, and you just can't ignore the benefits. That's $100 you can save that can go straight to new gear, software, accessories, whatever you want for your production setup. Don't wait. This offer won't be around for long. Once again, claim your exclusive offer now at videomaker.com/2020plus. Okay, we're back. So Noam, I wanted to just sort of dive into some production stuff, but maybe to start, you could just give us the 60,000 foot view of how did you get started with filmmaking and video production and all that?
Sure. So I got started, I guess, pretty naturally, organically, as a lot of filmmakers do. Just always liked cameras and filming things and taking acting classes, and just anything related to movies or music or entertainment I was sort of interested in as a kid. And I think I always dabbled in basically everything from, and as I got older, it became, whether it's color correction, visual effects, editing, writing, I sort of liked everything. And I think for me, the path to becoming, a filmmaker, which is just one of, I guess, a lot of things that I do. But it was just narrowing down what I really wanted to do, because I liked all these different things. And it was, should I be a cinematographer? Should I be a colorist? And for me, what helped was realizing, because I like all of these things, directing and, writing, directing, at least on the narrative side, was a good path, because then I could explore all of those different facets and try to tie them all together. So it was very much almost like a process of elimination. And I still, to this day, work in so many different capacities. I'm making narrative films now, feature films. I've done a couple of micro budget features, and going to start developing another film now that'll be a little bit probably larger in scope, but still very much independent. And regardless, all those sort of films are always I'm very hands-on. I like to, if I can, write, direct, edit. Sometimes I'll shoot my own material. So that's sort of, I guess, how I've operated. And then, how I've stayed afloat, just from a business perspective, is not just through these films, because this is more recent. And as everyone knows, independent films are not cash cows, even under the best of circumstances. But I have a commercial production company, and we do a lot of work, whether it's broadcast stuff or corporate stuff, and that helps pay the bills. I also have my website and podcast and different e-commerce things that I do online. So kind of all over the place. And hopefully that answered your question, though, and gives people a bit of a clearer picture, if there's such a thing.
Yeah, I went to your website. I just had to do a little bit of internet stalking before the podcast, and I saw that you describe yourself as primarily a director, a cinematographer, and colorist, and at the same time, and let's see, I must have seen that on your blog, I guess, but you've also got a production company where you do like some commercial corporate stuff. And then I checked your IMDb, and you've got lots of credits in just about every category. So, what do you consider yourself a specialist, or despite the fact that you've had your hands in a lot of different things, or are you really a generalist?
I think I specialize in being a generalist, I think is the answer. And I'll sort of tell you what I mean by that is, I actually wrote a whole article on my blog recently called, I think I called it something like the era of the jack of all trades filmmaker is here. And the reason I said it is because growing up and sort of earlier on in my career, everyone always told me, you have to specialize and just do one thing, just become a DP or a director, whatever. And that's not bad advice. It definitely will help you get a job. It'll help you be more employable, I guess, in a lot of respects. But for some people like myself that enjoy a lot of different things, and I think that today we have access to all these tools and resources that we didn't have 10 or even 5 years ago, that allow you to sort of take these various interests that you may have and sort of channel them into a specialty of their own. So for example, my biggest goal may be to make feature films, but I know that in order to do that, I still have to pay the bills and keep the lights on, pay my mortgage, all that sort of stuff. So in order to do that, there's different paths. You could have a full-time job, or in my case, you could have a business. And because the business is related to filmmaking, I get benefits from that. So if I buy an Alexa for my production company, then we could shoot our micro budget feature on it and increase the production value. So although everything is all these disparate parts, in my own mind, they're sort of connected in a way that makes sense, at least right now. And again, I think that the specialty in what I offer, at least on my blog and what I try to share with people, is how to maximize being a generalist and how to actually take advantage of that in a world where everybody's sort of telling you not to do that. or at least historically, that's been the advice. But how do you kind of flip that on its head and actually use that to your advantage? And in my case, that's been, again, a huge factor in just the fact that I haven't thankfully been hit perhaps as hard as I could have been during this pandemic, because all my eggs aren't in one basket. And if I need to dial up my e-commerce store because my productions go down, then that's great. So I'm still paying the bills while I'm able to write a screenplay or develop a feature. So again, I don't know if that quite answers it, but that's probably my best attempt.
It's funny, especially because you're in LA. Being a specialist pays off in LA, right? There are jobs you can get just being a colorist, right? But in the rest of the country, there are definitely big names everywhere and people doing that just about anywhere. But I think the more you get into anywhere USA, you're likely to be far more generalist because they're just not the talent to find to have all those things. So you end up going, well, I'm going to do that because I can do it better than if I can, finding someone out there or whatnot.
Yes.
And we deal with that. I mean, we were actually having that discussion at the office the other day. It was like, man, I would love it if I was just an editor all the time and all of the, and everything was just delivered to me and I got to just edit. That'd be great. And then they said, wouldn't you be bored? And I said, well, probably after a while I would probably be like, oh, let's get the camera out and do something else or what have you. So, it's interesting. I mean, I think it'd be fun to really dive deep into a specialty, but I tend to really enjoy the benefit you get by, I'm a better editor because I'm a shooter. I'm a better shooter because I'm an editor. I'm a better shooter because I'm a colorist. All those things are all going to help one another, and knowing the next step or knowing that handoff of how it needs to go, or like, and in my way, I slated our shot here because I'm going to be the one editing it, as well as being on it. That those things play into helping you make a stronger piece when you are having to do it, by yourself or not by yourself, but as a generalist, so to speak. I saw. So you talk about e-commerce. Are you talking about your LUTs? Is that more your e-commerce business or?
So I have two sites. So one is an educational site. It's an extension of my blog. So my website is noamkroll.com, and then noamkrollacademy.com. I just put all the courses that I release on there. So that's sort of one platform. And then the other platform is what you're referring to, Cinecolor, which it started just as LUTs. Now I've created these real film grain scans up to 65 millimeter gauge, which are available on there. And then other stuff too, is coming in the future that we're working on. But yeah, so that's definitely more on the e-commerce side. And I have some other things in the works as well, because it just feels like there's this great opportunity right now. And not just for myself, but any filmmaker, anyone really that just wants to have a little bit more autonomy over maybe how they spend their time, to run an online store or a YouTube channel or whatever. And there's so many ways that you can sort of make a living these days. And I think it's just up to you to decide how to monetize whatever you're doing, really.
So, when LUT started becoming a thing that people were looking for, I was really surprised by those that were able to go, okay, I'm going to start making a pack, and then all of a sudden I stopped trying to make one because I could I just get really, really good LUTs from somebody else. And then all of a sudden you go, I guess I can't make them myself. I'm going to keep on buying them. But it's how did you get into the LUT game, I guess, so to speak? Like,
sorry to interrupt. Yeah. I think there's a bit of a delay, but I was going to say that's a great question, because it sort of circles back to something I was going to say before, to one of your other points, just about going back to specializing. And I'd say roughly, 7 years ago or so, right before, maybe 8 years ago, right before I moved here to LA, I started specializing as a colorist, and I just basically took it up. I took a couple of courses online. I got up to speed. I got clients really quick. I increased my revenue very quick, like way faster than I thought, just by telling people I was a colorist. I wasn't even really good at all yet, but just everyone wants to be a director or, a DP. Nobody really wanted to be a colorist, especially then. And before I knew it, I was coloring tailoring features and doing all of these things. And that really helped me even when I moved here to LA, just to kind of create a foundation, et cetera. But I think what I realized, and again, this goes back to the whole specialist generalist argument, was that for me at least, I think it's great to become a specialist if the path that you're on is fully in line with how you want to work. But I didn't actually love sitting in a color suite all day, coloring for client sessions and going crazy over a power window to make somebody's eyes a little brighter in a 30-second commercial that nobody's going to see. It was just a little bit crazy for me. And at a certain point, I realized, okay, I have this skill. I've spent, years and years coloring and creating all of these LUTs, but how can I convert this skill or this service into an asset? So instead of just trading my time for money and getting a paycheck for doing something that I don't really even enjoy doing, maybe I can not enjoy doing it for a smaller amount of time and then distribute that as a product rather than a service that allows me to sort of remove myself from the equation. So I think that that's kind of how I got into LUTs. But it's also why, one of the reasons why I've steered away from specializing, because I'm too scatterbrained to ever commit to something that, 5 years from now, I'm not sure if I'm still going to be wanting to sit behind that Da Vinci wheel. So, again, hopefully that sort of gets to your question, but that's how I'd put it.
Totally. That was when I remember when it first started, like, oh, you can actually buy these, and instead of just getting the LUT that the Rec 709 LUT for your camera or what have you, and it's an interesting type of business in the way that you're like, yeah, you're selling this thing for people to use to sell a service, and that there's a lot of ways to interpret the color in an image or to obtain a look that you're going for. But it's just interesting how LUTs, for a long time I had to explain what a LUT was, and now it's like, what LUT do you use? Like, oh, that's a different question. That's not that's not step one anymore. That's kind of exciting. And it's not because people actually know what it's actually doing, but they know how to use them or how to apply them. Yeah. They know what it does generally, not enough they can make them on their own. But I mean, that's me too.
Yeah.
I definitely am not a LUT maker.
Exactly.
But
and it went from, the first time I ever learned about LUTs, it was in those early days when I was working as a colorist, and someone I was working with, a filmmaker, had a theatrically released documentary that he needed to apply a LUT to so they could do the film export. And he was going to do it at Technicolor or whatever. And I'd never even heard of a LUT. And he asked if I could do it. And I definitely couldn't do it. But then I looked into what's a LUT. And to me, it was always this very heavy duty professional tool initially. And then I realized you could use it more on your own, consumer level, or just for smaller projects, obviously creatively. But I think around that time, people, like the general sort of feeling among, especially probably newer filmmakers that had never seen a professional LUT in action, they just thought LUTs are not professional. They're just these presets, they're Instagram filters, and some of them kind of are that quality. But there's also, Red makes LUTs for their camera, and Sony, and there's technical LUTs, there's film emulation LUTs, there's creative LUTs. So there's all different ways that you can use them. And like any other tool, I think they can be used very professionally. And in any number of different ways, whether it's just auditioning different looks. That's how I use them, because I do like to color a lot of my grades from scratch. But sometimes I don't want to sit there for half an hour trying to decide if I want it warm or cold. I just want to click a few LUTs and get 80-90% of the way there. So for me, it's kind of an efficiency thing, but other people use it, to monitor on set, or for color matching or base grading, or any number of other reasons. So they're pretty versatile.
Yeah, well, and LUTs, the application of a LUT, I mean, you can actually load them into your camera and shoot with them if you wanted to, bring one in instead of having to go with what the camera had internally, or you, like you said, load it into a monitor, so you can actually monitor with the LUT but not go to tape that way. It's come a long way, and in the application, I remember talking to a Sony rep that I won't mention who they are, and we were talking to them about Nikon cameras, and And he says, "What's Nikon know about LUTs? They don't make motion picture cameras." And he was really, I mean, I don't know if I disagree with him or not, but it was just, he's like, "No one over there knows motion picture color. What are they making a LUT for?" And I'm like, they could have hired someone. I mean, like, it seems easy enough to do, but
it's funny because motion picture cameras, I've heard that argument too. And I own a few motion picture cameras. So I'm a total film nerd, and my favorite's the SR2 16 millimeter. It's in the closet over there, but they actually don't capture color. They just, open a gate so your film is exposed, but the color is dealt with, obviously at the lab. And that's why it's sort of funny when people say, well, they think like the Alexa is the best. They have the best color science because they had all this history. And I'm sure there is a degree of truth to that, but they weren't actually producing film stocks and chemicals. That's Kodak and Fuji and, all of those guys. So yeah, it's interesting, but we definitely have choices now as far as cameras. And it's really interesting to me to see all these new cameras that are getting released right now, because nobody can really shoot all that much. And there's the A7S III and all these new cameras that people want to work with. But I wonder again, like how disruptive that industry, how disrupted they'll be as well next year at NAB and so forth. It's going to be interesting.
My understanding is the camera industry, at least on the that level, the A7S III level, whatever you call that, prosumer or whatever it is, it has been hurt pretty bad by the pandemic. But at the same time, I think their reasoning as well. People aren't going outside, and so that's where people take pictures the most and shoot video, so they're not getting cameras. But it seems like, I don't know, maybe people are outside more often than they ever were this year. So maybe, I don't know. Hopefully it doesn't turn out to be quite as bad as they think.
You're right. Yeah. And something I always forget is a lot of the filmmakers, or a lot of the filmmakers, I guess, that I'm thinking about, who may or may not buy certain cameras. Many of those cameras are not even mainly purchased by filmmakers. Like the Sonys are photographers, street photographers, and just the average sort of hobbyist or enthusiast that might want a really great camera they could walk around with. So I'm sure those people are still buying cameras, and there's people documenting all the stuff that's going on. And, but yeah, it's just funny because I guess I'm so used to shooting with cameras and reviewing them and testing them. And right now I kind of feel like there's almost no point, because by the time I do this, there's going to be maybe another batch of cameras to review or that are getting released or not. But I guess we'll see.
Yeah, well, Chris will tell you it never ends, right? They just keep coming.
They don't. And I had cardboard just stacking up from the boxes. I actually was reading an article that said the R5, the Canon R5, is a great camera for 2020 because you'll never get to shoot longer than 10 minutes anyway. Yeah, because it overheats, and I was like, okay, that's but
the like, overheating. I've been following that pretty closely, well, somewhat closely, but
my image right here is on the R5. That's you're looking at me, and the camera's been on for more than an hour, but we're shooting in HD, so and not to the camera, but the image itself is being shot by the R5.
That's great. Well, I'm seeing it probably in 480 resolution because of all the compression, but it still looks good.
So Noam, you said something a few minutes ago, which I kind of want to unpack a little bit, which is that you got started doing color and you weren't very good at it. So maybe I'm making an assumption here that you enjoyed it at the time, and then you sort of got to this point where it's like, it's not that fun anymore. I have this theory that happens with people, because it happened to me as well, where when you're coloring your own work, it's really fun. Like you're taking your shots and you're making them look way better, and you're like, wow, this is great. But then as soon as you start applying it to other people's shots, it's like, and now it's a job.
Yes.
Did you encounter the same thing?
I definitely did. And I think it wasn't necessarily the actual act of sitting in front of the monitors and coloring, because I could enjoy doing that sometimes even more on other people's films, because they may just have higher end footage. They had a bigger budget, and it's kind of just cool to dial that in. But it was just I love being collaborative and working with people, but it was just the nature of having to have these really long in-person color sessions where people would come in and we would go back and forth, and then, we'd break for lunch and come back, and it would feel like we were kind of, still where we were at like 9 a.m. And it just didn't feel like a great use of my time. So I think it was more of the day-to-day sort of structure of what it meant to work as a colorist. And to go back to what you said, it's, I definitely think in the early days, I totally was, sucked like anyone I'm sure would when they're starting. But I think it was that I had a knack for it. I wasn't good. I didn't know how to use DaVinci or anything like that. But I felt like the reason I continued with it was because I felt like I could learn this. Like, even if I'm not as good as I should be right now, like it might come more naturally to me than, let's say, working in Nuke and trying to use nodes to create some visual effects tree like that. My brain just didn't work like that. But my brain could sort of look at a shot and say, oh, if this is a bit warmer, it'll look nicer. So I think that was sort of the starting point, but totally the end point was what you said, which was just like not enjoying what I was doing really anymore. And I'll still do it once in a while as a favor for a friend or something, but I just, I don't love getting into it if I don't have to.
So we had we interviewed a friend of the podcast, Jason Miller, recently. Chris wasn't on the show. I don't know if you listened this far in, Chris, but Jason was telling us that, he started doing visual effects as a hobby, as he was a young guy making, movies with visual effects. I mean, he really loved it. And then he got into the visual effects industry and learned that, he really didn't enjoy rotoscoping Shia LaBeouf's hair for 2 weeks straight, and wanted to get out of it. And, eventually found something that is more interesting to him. So if you look at your own work, and maybe you've identified coloring, doing color work as the thing that, doing as a job is not super fun. Is there anything that you got into where, it's just as enchanting now as it was when you get started?
Yeah, I think so. And I like how you use that word enchanting as opposed to enjoyable, because I think what I've learned over the years is some of the things that you enjoy doing the most, or that, people always say, like, follow your passion, follow what you love to do. And totally, I agree with that. But at the same time, some of the things that you love to do won't always be enjoyable. If you make a feature film, it takes you 2 or 3 years to make, and you're writing it and producing it and all these different stages. You're going to have bad days and bad months, and there's going to be disasters probably along the way. So I think what you said is exactly the right word, is like, if you're still enchanted with it. And for me, that is just making films. I think the way that as stressful as it can be to sort of make films and even release films right now, I just, I don't know, there's just a magic to kind of coming up with like an idea, getting a bunch of people together, shooting something that didn't exist before, and then creating something sort of out of thin air, especially for me when you do it with minimal resources. I think there's so much fun in that. And that is sort of what I think I'm enchanted with, and all of those other things that I do day to day, and that I'll continue to do for the foreseeable future, whether production company or my online stores or whatever. Those work because they're part of that feature film pipeline, like we were talking about before, and therefore I can still stay equally enchanted with those things, because I may not want to be reconfiguring my Shopify store for the 10th time, because somebody hacked it or whatever. But I know that it's part of a greater sort of goal. So, that keeps me plugged into it.
I started out doing music production and music engineering, and really loved doing that when it was my own music, and the creation was so enchanting, and so it was very easy to lean in and be excited about it. And all it took was one crappy punk band for me to record and being like, I don't want to do this. I don't want to have to try to make you sound better. I want to make myself sound better. Or it wasn't nearly enjoyable when I was having to do it as a service for somebody. even if
Yep.
you could help them in such a more incremental way. Whereas I still find lots of enjoyment doing it, but I realize I just can't do it for others. Whereas like for video production, I'm not spending my free time doing it, but I get so much passion from being able to be good at it. You know, if you're that thing, following your passion, that's great, but it's also like, can you get fulfillment for, or do you get your rocks off on doing something like the process, or is it the before and after, or what it is on that? Like for me, sometimes it's like being able to do something that is, enjoyable for somebody else. Like, oh, I can make something that somebody else can actually enjoy, or interact or interface with it. And I think it's really important for someone to find, to keep with that passion, right? Like the passion for you is you diverge with, like, my passion is I want to make money from coloring and not do coloring. Which is that, that's a passion for business, right? And
Exactly.
Those types of things, and making sure you feed those passions so that they can continue to fulfill you. If I didn't feel fulfilled when I finished a project, I'd stop doing it. But I know when I finish a project, it's just one birth. It's great to know you created this thing, but then knowing that you enjoyed the process from start to finish, and that was, movement in your life or in your heart, which is not a lot of things, for me at least, do that outside of like a good hard work. Working on something really intently and passionately feels really good to do. And it's, I feel bad for, I guess, those that their passion is something that makes no money, or brings other people sadness or something. But
that's sort of where I think there is, some hope for people to configure things in a way that works for them, because I think you bring up such a good point, and I've tried to address this, I think, in a newsletter or something that I released maybe last year, but I was just trying to share this idea that a lot of people, you think you want to do something. You see Steven Spielberg directing movies, so you want to direct movies, or whatever it is. You see a certain thing, but until you've actually done that thing, you don't know, number one, if you're great at it right away, which is okay because you could keep working and get better. But number two, if you even enjoy it, and if you don't enjoy it, or you don't enjoy parts of it, like I'll use directing as an example. I love directing my own narrative films. But I think I'd probably be a pretty bad director if someone just brought me in for a TV show for, a single episode, because, I don't work in those sort of conditions traditionally that well, just how I'm wired. I tend to be more of a free spirit in how I work, and, I'm more self-motivated in that sense as far as production is concerned. So, knowing what you don't want to do allows you to sort of narrow down and get really specific with your goals. Because again, to say I want to be a director, like, what does that really mean? Do you want to direct commercials? Do you want to direct feature films? If it's feature films, narrative, documentary, what genre, what budget level, the more specific you get, and the more specific you get with how you want to work, I think the better off you are, because then you can, again, sort of build the career around your strengths, and not just follow something because you're passionate about it. Because there's this expression, I think it was Mark Cuban, that said, don't follow your passion, follow your effort. Because a lot of people think they're passionate about something, but if you actually measure what you're spending your time on, maybe you're not really all that passionate about X or Y. Maybe you've told yourself that you are, but look at what you're actually spending your time on. And maybe there's something else that you get more enjoyment from, or are going to have more fulfillment from, or be more successful at. So, I'm sort of rambling, but I think all of that almost ties together, just the bigger conversation we had before about specializing and generalizing. And a last point that I forgot to make before, but I'll make for any of my fellow jack of all trades people listening, which is, I think one of the benefits early on of generalizing in your career is that you figure out what we're talking about now. You figure out what you're good at, what you like to do, what you don't like to do. If you pick when you're 22 years old and you just graduated film school that you're going to be, a colorist for the rest of your life, I don't know about you, but I definitely am glad, none of my decisions from that age are still holding, 10 plus years later. So yeah, I think one of the benefits again of just experimenting and trying things and being a generalist, at least early on, is seeing exactly what you do want to follow and giving yourself the opportunity to sort of try and fail and experiment. That's
good advice for anyone, right? Whether you think you're going to be a colorist or an accountant or whatever, right? 22-year-olds really don't know anything.
Yeah. I definitely did not. I still don't, but I definitely didn't.
I think the interesting thing about all of it is, like, say you want to be a director, it takes a lot of effort and time to get the opportunity to be a director, right? And so if you want to be a director and you want to get a chance to do it, you better get to doing it sooner than later, because you've got to figure out if you like it. Because if you do, you got to be in. And if you don't, it's gonna, you've put a lot of effort to get to that. So, I think trying to identify those things that you do and don't like early on, and of course, giving it a chance to actually do it. Don't just phone it in and be like, oh, that's not good. Well, although if you did that, you probably weren't into it anyway. But
no. But and again, just to build on your point, I think it goes to the idea of different jobs or ventures having different requirements in terms of becoming a specialist. So let's say you want to become a DIT, which is a fairly complicated job, but at the same time, if you're technically adept and you take a few courses and you work, on set enough times, like you could pick that up pretty quickly and be making pretty solid money as a DIT, for the right person, basically right away. If you want to create a studio, or even just make a feature film or something, like those are things that it takes you a lot longer to fail and therefore to learn from. So, if you have to make 3, 4, 5, 6 features before, the next one sort of blows up and is really the way that you wanted to make that film, or does the thing that you wanted to do with it. That could take you 15 or 20 years, whereas learning to be a DIT is not going to take you that long. So I think, it's important for people who want to go into narrative filmmaking specifically, or even documentary filmmaking, just to understand, like, it is something that you totally can and should specialize in, but you have to play the long game with it, because they aren't specialties that unfortunately you can just learn from taking a college course or from experience in a short amount of time. You need that longer sort of period of time to just grow, I guess.
So we're coming up on, actually, I think we've maybe have passed our hour mark. I'm not sure, but I wanted to squeeze in one last question. I always ask this kind of question to everyone. I'm going to put you on the spot. If you don't have an answer, it's okay. We can edit around it or something. But so your podcast, the Show Don't Tell podcast, is really all about micro budget filmmaking. What is one secret that you could give our listeners about being a better micro budget filmmaker, or one secret they can apply on their next micro budget film?
I think the secret is, and I'm just learning this really now, but I think the secret is do something that you could only do with a micro budget, and take advantage of the fact that you don't have money for your movie. Because if someone gave you $10 million to make whatever dream film you have in the back of your mind, you're probably going to have to sacrifice a lot of things, because other people have a stake in it, and other people are going to want to have a say in how many swear words there are, how many scenes that have this or that are in them. And you can, I think on the top end of Hollywood right now, the movies that are coming out are in large part, they played very, very safe. And there's so much room for experimentation that can be done on a micro budget level. So embrace that. Don't try to make a big blockbuster film with no money. Try to make a $10,000 or $20,000 movie that does something that literally could not be done by a $1, $2, $3 million film. And then at the very least, you've created something different and original, and that tends to get noticed. So that'd be my advice.
All right, that's good advice. Better than the common thing that we hear, which is like, use a wheelchair as a dolly.
Yeah, right around your location. And all that's good advice, by the way. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. I just think everyone knows that advice, hopefully, and you should totally follow most of all of that. But yeah, it's just your idea and what you're doing with the film, like that transcends your budget.
All right, cool. Well, Noam, thanks for giving us some time today.
My pleasure. I look forward to doing the reverse as well.
All right. Thanks everyone for tuning in. We'll catch y'all next time. Big thanks to Noam Kroll for joining us. You can check out his blog at noamkroll.com. And also you can listen to the podcast, the Show Don't Tell podcast on iTunes. We'll put a link in the description so you can go take a listen. For Chris Monlux and everyone here at Videomaker, I'm Mike Wilhelm, and you've been listening to the Videomaker podcast. We'll catch you next time.